Colleagues, I bring you House Bill 3521 from your Rules Committee. It brings voter registration in Oregon into the 21st century, making voting more accessible while streamlining the process, reducing errors, and improving efficiency. I had to take some time to understand this bill, but now that I do, I see only upsides to it. And here's what it does. It defines a qualified designated voter registration agency as an agency that necessarily already collects the data required for voter registration. That's age, residence, and citizenship verification, and an electronic image of the individual signature. It directs such an agency, most importantly, the Department of Motor Vehicles, to provide that data to the Secretary of State. It requires the Secretary of State to register such a person to vote if he or she is qualified to vote and is not already registered. It requires the Secretary of State to notify that person and to provide them a procedure for opting out of the registration if they so desire, or to adopt a party affiliation. It prohibits the Secretary of State from adding the person to the voter rolls or sending him or her a ballot until they have had at least 14 days in which to respond. It increases the maximum number of electors in a precinct from 5,000 to 10,000, and I've got more on that later. It protects minor political parties in this transition, and more about that later too. It has embedded safeguards for records that are protected from disclosure, such as judges and law enforcement personnel, and those with protective orders. Finally, it protects from disclosure as a public record the data associated with anyone less than 18 years of age. So, what are the problems that we solve with this bill? Number one, about 1/4 of all citizens eligible to register are typically unregistered as of the 20-day registration cutoff. In 2012, about 16,000 eligible citizens registered between the registration deadline and the election, and so were unable to vote in the election. Voter registration drives, number two, tend to concentrate on walkable districts and places where people congregate, lending to relative under-registration in rural communities. Paper registrations, 126,000 in 2012, must be entered by hand, increasing the opportunity for human error. During surges in registration, some counties have to hire temporary workers to meet deadlines for data entry. The Department of Motor Vehicles already collects, verifies, and stores the same information that is required for registration. About 1/4 of Oregon voters already believe that the DMV automatically updates their voter registration information. So here is how this will work. A person goes into the DMV to obtain or renew their Oregon driver's license or identification. They provide verification of age, address, and citizenship, get their picture taken, and provide a signature that is scanned and stored with their record. The data required for voter registration, that is proof of age, address, and citizenship status, and electronic signature, is transmitted to the Secretary of State, who determines whether they are already registered or not. If not, the Secretary of State creates a voter registration record. A card is mailed to the new potential voter with instructions for declining registration if desired, and for choosing a party affiliation if desired. If there is no response, 14 days later, the new voter is added to the voter rolls as a non-affiliated voter. If registration is declined, the record is not added. If a party affiliation is chosen, that is added to the record. The information required for mailing and verifying ballots is transmitted to the appropriate county clerk. After that, the registered voter would be mailed a ballot in any election he or she qualifies for under the current rules. A voter who fails to return his or her ballot in several elections, as set in current rule, will be transferred to inactive status, as is the case for inactive voters registered in the current system. If a new driver is under age 18, his or her record is not added to any publicly disclosed list. He or she is only added to voter rolls when actually eligible to vote. If a driver record is flagged for any reason of non-disclosure, such as the existence of a protective order, a stalking kind of thing, judges or law enforcement personnel, it will not be added to any publicly disclosed list under the procedures already in place at the DMV. The cost of implementation, probably about $300,000, will be covered by the Federal Help America Vote Act's dollars, including any costs to the DMV for adjusting their systems to facilitate this process, as well as initial costs to the counties. There will be some additional cost to counties associated with an increase in numbers of ballots to mail. That is projected to be offset over time with a significant decrease in data entry requirements. The increase in the maximum number of electors in a precinct is in the bill to protect counties from having to redraw precinct lines before redistricting. The problem here is that precincts are based on a number of electors, that's registered voters, with a maximum set by statute, unlike our districts, which are drawn to be closely equivalent in census count. If the bill indeed leads to increased registration, it could put some precincts over the $5,000 cap, triggering a requirement for adding precincts and redrawing boundaries. This provision is not in the bill to make precincts geographically bigger, but to comfortably accommodate an increase in registration within existing precincts. More people moving into your district, for instance, or into particular precincts. Under the cap, precinct size is determined by counties. I'd personally like to see precincts smaller than they currently are, but that's a case I'll talk with my county government about. There was a concern that minor parties would be left in the dust by this bill, as their mechanism for qualifying would be tied to numbers posted before the change. For the purposes of calculating the numbers required to qualify minor parties, the registration numbers as of next week would remain in effect for the 2014 election. Now, I want to emphasize that citizenship is verified by the DMV, which is currently the only agency that qualifies under this bill or under the National Voter Registration Act of 1993. If you have renewed your license since 2008, you know that even if you've had an Oregon driver's license for decades, they require significant proof of citizenship, such as a passport or the equivalent combinations of documents, such as a birth certificate plus a Social Security card. All of these have stringent, redundant standards of proof. This is not applicable to drivers who register under the Senate Bill 833 passed this year, only to those who obtain a full driver's license and verify citizenship in the process. Under this law, any agency qualified in the future to be part of this would have to also have part of its procedures verification of citizenship status, age, and address, and obtaining and storing a digital signature. There is no other agency that qualifies now besides the DMV. These requirements are both in this bill and in the federal law. The prospect of facilitating access to the ballot, reducing or eliminating disparities in rates of registration and ballot participation, reducing errors in the registration process, and reducing costs and stress to the system over time, all of those things won me over to this bill. Now, some have claimed that this would primarily benefit large population centers like Multnomah County. Indeed, we have positive testimony from the Multnomah County chair citing the inefficiencies and costs associated with recording paper registrations as they're currently gathered. But there's also support from other parts of the state, reflecting the benefit to participation in areas that are not natural magnets of voter registration efforts. Patricia Hitt, Douglas County Clerk, wrote this: "As a clerk, my job is to encourage as many people as possible to participate in the election process and to make it as easy as possible." And she also wrote, "When going over this with my staff, the comment was, I won't have a job anymore." Well, we know that's not going to be true, but it does show you how much time we are devoting daily to voter registration. Steve Druckenmiller, Lynn County Clerk, testified, "Voting is the underpinning to all other rights. The current registration system creates barriers to voting." He also wrote, "And consider the thousands of Oregonians who we can bring into our system, who will make it stronger, which is what we all want." He says, "I'm elected, you're elected, let's trust the voters and try to make our system stronger, just like vote by mail did." Colleagues, in the current system, voter registrations come in intense surges right before the 20-day cutoff before elections, particularly elections with high interest. Many counties have to add staff to meet deadlines for making ballots available. Driver's license applications come in steadily all year long. There will continue to be some increase prior to an election, but at a much more manageable level. The DMV already gathers and verifies all of the information required for voter registration. This bill brings our registration system into the 21st century and supports our Oregon vote-by-mail system. And so very simply, I urge an aye vote. Thank you very much.